My name is Commander Thavis Morikin, and I have watched cadets break for 47 years. I have buried more young soldiers than I can count. I have signed death notices in 14 different languages. I am six-limbed, gray-skinned, and older than most of the instructors at this academy. I have seen everything. I had never seen anything like Kira Voss. The day she arrived, I was standing on the landing platform of the Kythol Military Academy, watching the transport shuttle descend through the purple clouds of our training moon. I was not expecting much. Earth had only joined the Coalition 11 months earlier. Their species was new, small by galactic standards, and their homeworld carried a classification that most of us refused to believe was accurate. A Class 9 Deathworld. A place where the gravity crushed normal bones, where the weather could turn violent in minutes, where the oceans moved because of a moon in the sky, and where the animals hunted in organized groups. No species from a Class 9 world had ever sent a cadet to this academy. Most Class 9 worlds were uninhabited. The Coalition had assumed, for decades, that nothing intelligent could grow on a world that hostile. Then humans were discovered, and humans, it turned out, had not only survived on that world, they had built cities on it, they had farmed it, they had learned to love it. The shuttle door opened and a small figure stepped out. She was shorter than I expected. Her hair was brown and tied back in a simple knot. Her eyes were green and alert. She carried a single bag over her shoulder and she was smiling. I had prepared a formal welcome speech. I had practiced it in my own language and then in the common Coalition tongue. I had expected her to arrive nervous, perhaps frightened, the way all new cadets arrived. I was ready to comfort her. Instead, she walked straight up to me, stuck out her hand in a strange gesture I did not recognize and said, "Hi, I'm Kira. Could you tell me where the cafeteria is? The flight was long and I'm starving." I stared at her. In 47 years, no cadet had ever arrived at this academy and asked for food before asking about the trials. No cadet had ever arrived without fear on their face. No cadet had ever looked at me, the instructor who would decide whether they lived or died in the exams, and treated me like a helpful stranger at a train station. I pointed toward the main building. She thanked me, adjusted her bag, and walked off whistling. A sound I later learned was a form of casual human expression used when the person was content or relaxed. That was the moment I should have known, but I did not understand yet. None of us did. The first warning came 3 days later in the equipment bay. We were issuing standard training gear to the new class of cadets. Among the equipment was a field pack weighted to match the load a soldier would carry during extended operations. The pack weighed 72 standard units. Most cadets could lift it with effort. A few of the stronger species, such as the Vorthan or the Drenmer, could carry it comfortably. Kira picked it up with one hand. She did not notice that she had done anything unusual. She slung it over her shoulder the way someone might carry a small bag of groceries, and then she asked the quartermaster if there was a heavier version available. She said she was worried the pack was too light for proper training. She said that, at home, she used to carry her little brother around on her shoulders, and he was much heavier. The quartermaster, a soft-spoken Mendori named Veth, came to my office that evening. Veth had not slept. Veth was trembling. Veth told me that the human girl was either lying about her strength or that her species was something the Coalition had seriously misunderstood. I told Veth to go home and rest. Then I pulled up the files on Earth. I read through the night. The more I read, the colder I became. Earth had a gravity reading of 1 full standard unit. That was nothing unusual on its own. But Earth also had an atmosphere dense with oxygen, weather systems that could level cities, and a wide range of predators that had hunted early humans for 2 million years. The humans had not been the top creatures on their world when they started. They had become the top creatures. They had done it without claws, without natural armor, without venom, without size. They had done it with nothing but their minds, their endurance, and something the report called persistence hunting. I had to look up persistence hunting. I wish I had not. It turned out that early humans had developed a hunting strategy unique in the galaxy. They would pick a large, fast animal and they would simply follow it. For hours, for days, they would not give up. They would not stop. The animal would run and the humans would walk, and eventually the animal would collapse from exhaustion and the humans would still be walking. Humans could sweat, I learned. Most species could not. This allowed humans to dump heat from their bodies in ways that other creatures could not match. A human on an open plain with enough water could outlast almost any animal in the galaxy. They had not evolved to be the strongest. They had evolved to be the ones who never stopped coming. I sat in my office for a long time after reading that. I thought about the cheerful young woman who had asked me where the cafeteria was. I thought about her casually lifting a pack that weighed nearly as much as she did. I thought about her smile. I did not sleep that night either. The next week, the cadets began their basic physical assessments. These were not the final exams. These were simple fitness tests designed to give us a baseline for each cadet. Running, climbing, lifting, endurance. The standard tests that every species had completed for 200 years. Kira broke every record we had. She did not break them by a small amount. She broke them by amounts that should not have been possible. The endurance march, a 40-kilometer walk with full gear across varied terrain, had a record time of 6 hours and 11 minutes, set by a Tharsan cadet in the previous generation. Kira finished it in 4 hours and 28 minutes. She was not even breathing hard at the end. She asked politely if there was a longer course available. She said she enjoyed long walks. The climbing test had a recorded failure rate of 30%. Kira climbed the course twice. The second time she did it backwards, just to see if she could. The lifting test involved a series of weighted objects. Kira completed it, paused, and then helped another cadet, a struggling Jelthari named Kui, finish the course. She did not make fun of Kui. She cheered him on. She told him he was doing great. She picked up the weights he had dropped and handed them to him with a grin. Kui came to me afterward. Kui was crying. Kui told me that no cadet from another species had ever helped him before. Kui said he had been ready to quit the academy that morning, and now he wanted to try again. I did not know what to do with that information. By the end of the first month, the other cadets had started calling Kira by a nickname. They called her the Earth Girl. It was not meant as an insult. It was meant with a strange mixture of admiration and fear. She was friendly with everyone. She remembered names. She shared her rations with cadets who had run out. She laughed easily. She cried during a film shown in the cultural exchange program, a film about a lost pet returning home, and she was not ashamed of the tears. But she also did things that terrified the other cadets without meaning to. She ate food that poisoned 2 of her roommates. She went jogging on days when the weather warnings advised all cadets to stay indoors. She handled training weapons with a casual comfort that suggested long familiarity. When asked where she had learned, she said her grandfather had taught her to shoot when she was 9. She said it the way another cadet might mention learning to ride a bicycle. I began to realize slowly that I did not understand what I was looking at. I had spent 47 years training soldiers. I thought I knew what a warrior looked like. I thought I knew what courage was, what strength was, what endurance was. Kira Voss was teaching me that I had never known any of those things. Not truly, not the way her people knew them. The final exams were still 6 months away. 6 months to prepare. 6 months for the cadets to train, to study, to build themselves up for the trials that would make or break their careers. 6 months for the instructors to watch them closely and decide which cadets were ready and which were not. 6 months for me to watch the small woman from the Deathworld and try to understand what she really was. I did not know it yet, but the academy was about to change forever. The exams we had used for 847 cycles were about to be tested in a way their designers had never imagined. and a young woman with green eyes and a bright smile was about to show us, without ever meaning to, that we had been wrong about almost everything. The first trial was coming, the gauntlet of nerves, the trial that broke 40% of cadets before they ever touched a weapon. I watched Kira laughing with her friends in the training yard, helping Qui stretch his aching muscles, teaching a group of cadets a simple hand game from her homeworld. I had a terrible feeling that the trial was not ready for her. I had a worse feeling that none of us were. Trial chamber was ready. The psychological warfare simulation had been refined for 200 years. It was the most feared of the early trials, and for good reason. Cadets were placed alone in a sealed chamber, and for 72 hours the simulation fed their minds with fabricated horrors. Every species had universal fears: the loss of loved ones, the failure of a sacred duty, the extinction of their people. The simulation found those fears and used them like a sculptor uses a chisel. 40% of cadets could not complete the trial. Some emerged early, begging to be released. Some had to be removed unconscious. A few, in the long history of the academy, had never truly recovered. The trial was designed to be the first test of the mind, the first proof that a cadet could face horror without breaking. On the morning Kira was scheduled to enter the chamber, I stood outside the observation room with Dean Korvac. The dean was a tall, thin being of the Osni species, with long silver fingers and deep black eyes that missed nothing. He had run this academy for 60 years. He had seen more cadets enter that chamber than anyone alive. He turned to me and said quietly, "Thaves, do you think she is ready?" I looked through the observation window. Kira was sitting on the bench outside the chamber, tying her hair back. She was humming. She waved at a passing technician and asked how his day was going. I said to the dean, honestly, I do not think the chamber is ready for her. He laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. He thought I was making a joke. I was not. I had read Earth's entertainment records. I had seen what humans considered fun. I had seen the films they paid to watch, the stories they told their children, the games they played in their free time. Humans, it turned out, sought out fear on purpose. They built machines designed to frighten them. They told each other stories in the dark to make themselves tremble. They watched films specifically created to make them feel terror, and then they laughed about it afterward, and they paid money for the experience and went back for more. A species that had evolved alongside predators for 2 million years had not simply learned to survive fear. They had learned to enjoy it. They had domesticated fear the way other species had domesticated animals. I stood in the observation room, watching Kira stretch her arms and smile at the chamber door, and I understood, for the first time, that we had no idea what we were about to do. The door opened, she walked in, the door closed behind her. The trial began, and I sat down to watch something I would never forget. Kira waved at the camera before the lights went dark. She smiled like she was entering a theater, not a chamber designed to break her mind. The door sealed with a deep hiss. The lights dimmed. The simulation system activated. I sat in the observation room with Dean Korvac and the chief psychologist, a small, gentle being of the Mendori species named Ellis. Ellis had empathic senses, the ability to feel emotional currents from a distance. Ellis was the one who monitored cadets during this trial, ready to call for emergency extraction if a cadet's mind showed signs of permanent damage. Ellis was already frowning. Ellis leaned toward the monitor, tapped the screen, and said, "Her heart rate is dropping." I asked what Ellis meant. Cadets usually had rising heart rates during this trial, fast breathing, sweat, the universal signs of fear. Ellis said, "She is relaxing. She is becoming calm. Commander, I have never seen a baseline like this. She is responding to the simulation the way most beings respond to a warm bath." Dean Korvac and I looked at each other. On the main screen, we could see what the simulation was showing Kira. The system used surface memories pulled from her mind to build the scenarios. It had chosen, as a first test, the memory of her younger brother. The simulation was showing her brother in danger, a scenario where he was lost, calling for her, unable to find her in the dark. It was a scenario designed to trigger immediate panic. Kira laughed. She laughed softly with affection and she said, out loud to the empty chamber, "Oh, Ben, you are always hiding. Come on, buddy, let me find you." She began walking through the simulation, calmly, with the relaxed body language of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The simulation tried to intensify the scenario. It made the darkness deeper. It added distant cries. It added the sound of unknown creatures in the black. Kira kept walking. She called her brother's name. She made small jokes to the darkness. She said at one point, "Benny, if you jump out and try to scare me again, I swear I will eat the last of your snacks." The simulation, confused, tried to adjust. It shifted scenarios. It showed her comrades dying. It showed her hometown burning. It showed her the extinction of her species, a visual designed to produce crushing grief in any being who had ever loved their own people. Kira watched the scene. Her face grew thoughtful, and then she said gently, "This is not real, I can feel it. The colors are wrong, and my mom would never wear that coat in summer." The simulation froze. Ellis stood up so fast that the chair fell over behind her. Ellis said, "She just recognized the simulation. Nobody recognizes the simulation, not on the first scenario." The system tried again. It pulled deeper. It found older memories. It built a scenario from her early childhood, a memory of a car crash she had been in at the age of 6, a memory of pain and fear and helplessness. Kira watched the scenario unfold. She became quiet. And then, slowly, she sat down in the middle of the simulated scene, and she began talking to her 6-year-old self. She said, hey, little me, I know this is scary, I know it hurts, but I want you to know something. You are going to be fine. You are going to grow up strong. You are going to go to space, kid. You are going to see the stars. And on the day you need it most, I promise I will come back here and tell you it is all going to be worth it." The simulation paused. Ellis was crying, silently. Ellis turned to the dean and said, in a voice that shook, "She is healing herself. She walked into the worst memory of her life, and she is using the simulation as therapy." The system tried to continue, but something was happening to it. The simulation had been designed to feed on fear, to use a cadet's terror as fuel for the scenarios. Kira was not providing any fuel. She was turning every scenario into something else. A reunion, a lesson, a joke, a memory to revisit and repair. At hour 12, the simulation attempted its strongest attack, a loved one's death. Specifically, the death of her grandfather, a figure the system had identified as central to her emotional life. The scene played out, her grandfather lying in a bed reaching for her hand, telling her he was proud of her. Kira held his hand. She kissed his forehead. She said, "I love you, Grandpa. Thank you for teaching me to fish. Thank you for teaching me to shoot. Thank you for being the best man I ever knew." And then she said quietly, "But you already said goodbye to me 3 years ago, and I already made my peace. So whatever you are not him, and I know that. But I am still going to sit with you for a while because I miss him and this is nice." She sat with the simulation of her grandfather for 6 hours. She did not cry in fear. She cried in love. She told stories to the empty chamber. She laughed at old jokes. She thanked the simulation for memories it could only have taken from her own mind. Ellis could not watch anymore. Ellis left the observation room and went to the psychology wing, and, I was later told, sat alone in the dark for an hour. Ellis told me afterward that, in 40 years of service, Ellis had never felt an emotional signature like Kira's. Ellis said the young human had turned every weapon the simulation had aimed at her into a gift. At hour 48, the simulation essentially gave up. It began showing her random scenarios, pulling from her memories without strategy. Trying anything to produce the fear response it was designed to measure. Kira treated the whole thing like a pleasant walk through a memory garden. She reminisced about her high school. She practiced a dance she had learned from her older sister. She told the simulation jokes and seemed genuinely amused when it did not laugh. At hour 71, Kira stood up, stretched, and asked out loud if the trial was nearly over. She said she was starting to get hungry. At hour 71 and 14 minutes, she emerged. A new record. The previous record, held by a Tharsan officer who was now a general in the Coalition fleet, had been 87 hours. That officer had emerged sobbing and had not spoken for 2 days afterward. Kira emerged smiling. She asked me what was for dinner. I had no words. I stood in front of her, speechless, while she stretched her arms and cracked her neck and said that the chamber had been a little stuffy but overall not bad. Dean Korvac called an emergency meeting of the senior instructors that night. Every species represented on our faculty was there. Vorthan, Osni, Mendori, Drenmer, Tharsan, Velthari, 12 of the finest military minds in the Coalition. We sat around a long table and we watched the recording of Kira's trial in silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Dean Korvac said, "We have a problem." A Vorthan instructor, massive and heavy-browed, said, "She cheated somehow." I shook my head. I had reviewed the logs. The simulation had run perfectly. Her mind had simply responded differently than any mind the system had ever encountered. Dean Korvac said, "I want her expelled. I want her investigated. This is not normal. This is dangerous." I surprised myself then. I stood up. I said, "Sir, with respect, I do not think she is dangerous. I think she is human. I think we have underestimated what that word means." I told them about Earth's entertainment, about horror films, about ghost stories, about roller coasters, a concept I had only recently learned about, where humans paid money to ride machines that simulated falling and near crashes because they found the sensation thrilling. I told them about Earth's history, about a species that had evolved in the presence of apex predators, and had not merely survived but had thrived, had conquered, had eventually domesticated the very creatures that once hunted them. I said, we designed these trials for species that fear. We designed them on the assumption that fear is the hardest emotion to overcome, and that a soldier who masters fear is worthy of command. But we never considered that a species might grow up so thoroughly familiar with fear that they treat it the way we treat the weather. Something to be checked in the morning, something to be respected, but not something to be afraid of. There was a long silence. The Mendori psychologist Ellis, who had joined us partway through the meeting, finally spoke. Ellis said, "Her mind is the healthiest mind I have ever observed under stress. She does not deny fear. She welcomes it. She uses it. In her culture, fear appears to be a friend that visits and leaves. In ours, it is an enemy that must be defeated. She did not defeat the trial. She made friends with it." Dean Korvac rubbed his long silver fingers across his temples. He said, "What do we do with her?" I said, "We let her continue, and we prepare for the next trials to not go the way we expect." The next morning, Kira was in the training yard, teaching 3 other cadets how to play a simple human game that involved throwing a small disc back and forth. They were laughing. She was patient with them. A Jelthari cadet, the same one she had helped during the lifting test, threw the disc too hard and it hit Kira in the face. She laughed harder. She said she had deserved it for giving bad instructions. I watched her from my office window. I thought about the simulation trying to terrify her and failing. I thought about a 6-year-old girl talking to her grandfather in an empty chamber. I thought about what was coming next. The crucible was 2 weeks away. A physical trial, lava flats, frozen tundra, high-pressure water chambers, vacuum corridors, a week-long gauntlet designed to bring even the strongest cadets to the edge of physical failure. I wondered, as I watched her laugh in the training yard, what she was going to do with it. I wondered if we should be warning the trial instead of the cadet. The morning of the crucible arrived with a pale red sunrise over the academy grounds. I stood at the entrance to the trial complex with the other instructors, watching the 20 remaining cadets prepare. Out of the original class of 40, 14 had already dropped out or been removed for various reasons. The gauntlet of nerves had claimed 7. The physical assessments had removed 5. 2 had simply decided that military service was not for them and had requested transfers back to civilian programs. 20 cadets remained. Kira was among them, standing near the front, stretching her legs and chatting with a Drenmer cadet named Vor about the best way to handle extreme cold. The crucible was not a single trial. It was 5 environments, each designed to push a different part of the cadet's body to its limits. Lava flats for heat tolerance and quick movement, cryogenic tundra for cold endurance, high-pressure water chambers for strength under impossible weight, vacuum corridors for breath control and pressure management, and finally, a mountain ascent in thin atmosphere, climbing a simulated peak while the oxygen levels dropped with every meter gained. Cadets were given 7 days to complete all 5 environments. They could rest between them, but they could not skip any. Each environment had to be cleared in full. The record was held by a Vorthan officer, now retired, who had completed the entire crucible in 4 days and 11 hours. Most cadets, if they completed it at all, took the full 7 days. I gave my standard speech to the cadets. I told them to pace themselves. I told them to listen to their bodies. I told them that the crucible was not a race but a test of endurance, and that the fastest completion time was not necessarily the best one. Kira raised her hand and asked politely if there was a bonus for finishing early. The other cadets laughed. They thought she was joking. I was no longer sure. The lava flats were first. Cadets were issued heat-resistant suits and instructed to cross a 3-kilometer expanse of superheated ground. The surface was not actually lava. It was a metal plate heated to temperatures that would quickly damage any unprotected body. The suits provided some protection, but the heat still seeped through, and cadets had to move quickly to avoid being cooked alive inside their own gear. Kira crossed the lava flats in 11 minutes. She ran. She did not walk. She ran the entire 3 kilometers, and when she emerged on the other side, her suit was steaming and she was laughing. She had apparently made up a game for herself. She had pretended that the ground was actually lava, which it nearly was, and she had treated the crossing like a childhood game she called The Floor is Lava. She hopped from one imagined safe spot to another. She sang a small song to herself as she ran. The Drenmer cadet Vor, who went next, took 43 minutes. Vor came out shaking. Vor told me privately that Vor had nearly panicked when the heat began to seep into the suit. Vor asked how Kira had been so calm. I did not have a good answer for Vor. The cryogenic tundra was the second environment. A frozen plain where the temperature dropped to levels that would freeze most species solid within minutes. Cadets were given thermal suits, but the suits were deliberately underpowered, forcing the cadets' bodies to produce heat to survive. This is where I first truly understood what humans were. Kira, it turned out, could sweat. I had read this in the report, but I had not grasped its meaning until I saw her in the tundra. Human bodies, it seemed, had evolved to control their own temperature in ways that other species could not match. They could shed heat by sweating. They could produce heat by shivering. They had a level of fine control over their internal temperature that most of the galaxy did not possess. In the tundra, Kira used this ability like a tool. She regulated her body temperature with conscious effort. She took deep breaths. She performed small movements to generate heat. She hummed to herself, which I later learned was a human technique for calming the mind and controlling breathing. She walked across the tundra in 3 hours. She finished faster than the record by half a day. When she emerged, she said the cold had reminded her of winter on her grandfather's farm. She said it made her feel homesick. The other cadets were beginning to look at her differently now. Not with admiration exactly, not with envy, with something closer to awe mixed with a deep, quiet discomfort. The high-pressure water chambers came next. Cadets were sealed into a chamber and lowered into simulated deep-water pressure. They had to complete a series of physical tasks, moving weighted objects and assembling simple machines, all while their bodies were under pressure that would crush most species without protective gear. Humans, it turned out, had a surprising relationship with water. Earth was covered in oceans. Humans had spent millennia sailing those oceans, swimming in them, diving into them. Their bodies were not naturally built for deep pressure, but they had built tools and techniques to handle it, and they had passed those techniques down through their culture for thousands of years. Kira moved through the water chamber with calm efficiency. She had clearly been trained in deep diving before she ever came to the academy. She knew how to equalize pressure in her ears. She knew how to conserve oxygen. She knew how to stay calm when the pressure made her feel like her chest was being squeezed. She finished the chamber in 2 hours. The second fastest time was 7 hours. The vacuum corridors were the fourth environment. A long, airless passage that cadets had to cross while carrying sealed oxygen tanks. The tanks were deliberately small, forcing cadets to move quickly and efficiently. The corridor had several obstacles that required careful navigation. Kira crossed the corridor in one breath. I want to be clear. I do not mean she crossed it quickly. I mean she crossed it without breathing. She took one deep breath before entering, and she did not exhale or inhale again until she was on the other side. The coalition medical team was baffled. They ran tests on her afterward. They discovered that her lung capacity was within normal human parameters, which meant that every human on her homeworld could probably do the same thing. The mountain ascent was the final environment. A simulated peak, 15,000 meters tall, with atmospheric conditions that grew thinner and colder as the cadet climbed. Cadets were given climbing gear but no oxygen support. They had to reach the summit on their own. Kira climbed the mountain in a day. She sang the entire way up. The monitoring equipment recorded her singing songs from her homeworld, old folk melodies, lullabies her mother had sung to her, a song about a girl who went to sea and came back with stories. She sang to herself the way other cadets might talk to themselves for comfort. She reached the summit at the end of the first day. She sat at the top for an hour, eating a ration bar and watching the simulated sunrise. She waved at the camera on the summit pole. She said into the microphone, "This view reminds me of home. Earth has mountains too. You should all see them someday." She completed the entire crucible in 2 days and 18 hours. The record had been 4 days and 11 hours. She had broken it by nearly half. When she came out of the final environment, she was not even limping. She was hungry. She wanted a shower. She asked whether she could take a nap before the next trial started. The other cadets took the full 7 days. Most of them barely finished. 3 had to be extracted for medical treatment. One, a young Tharsing named Keth, cried when the crucible ended. Keth said that Keth had never been pushed so close to the limits of Keth's body before. Keth said it had been the hardest thing Keth had ever done. Keth was proud. Kira congratulated Keth and shared her rations with Keth and told Keth that Keth was the toughest person Kira had met at the academy. Keth believed her. Keth smiled. I watched them together in the recovery hall. A young woman from a Deathworld telling a shaking cadet from a gentler world that they were strong. I watched her build Keth back up with simple words and simple kindness. I watched her treat every other cadet as an equal, as a friend, as someone worth knowing. She never bragged about her own performance. She never made anyone feel smaller. She celebrated their finishes with the same enthusiasm she would have celebrated her own. I began to understand that her physical strength was not the most important thing about her. Her mental toughness was not the most important thing. What made her dangerous, in a way the coalition had never accounted for, was something harder to measure. She made the others around her stronger. She made them believe they could finish. She made them believe they were worth finishing. She made them believe in themselves. And in doing so, she was raising the performance of the entire class, quietly and without fanfare. I mentioned this to Dean Korvac during our evening debrief. The dean listened carefully. Then the dean said slowly, "Thaves, are you telling me that this cadet is a force multiplier?" I said, "I am telling you that the other cadets are going to finish trials they should not have been able to finish. Because of her." The dean was quiet for a long moment. Then the dean said, "The hunt is next. The hunt does not allow for teamwork. It is a solo trial. She will be alone with the creatures." I thought about that. I thought about Kira alone in the jungle with the galaxy's apex predators. I was not worried about her. I was worried about the predators. The hunt began at dawn. Cadets were dropped, alone, into a massive jungle preserve that covered a full quarter of our training moon. The preserve had been built over decades, stocked with apex predators from 12 different worlds. The Virax Stalker, a six-legged hunter with venom that paralyzed within seconds. The Dread Maw of Obris, a massive predator the size of a shuttle that hunted by sound. The Shriekfang, a smaller but faster creature that traveled in packs and could climb any surface. Dozens more, each one a nightmare from some poor world's history. Cadets had 96 hours to cross the preserve and retrieve a signal beacon from the center. They had a knife, a water container, a first aid kit, and a basic survival manual. No weapons beyond the knife. No advanced technology. Just their species' natural instincts and whatever training the Academy had given them. The preserve had an 81% casualty rate over the last century. Some cadets were extracted wounded. Some were extracted dead. Some were never extracted at all, and their remains were left in the preserve as a kind of dark warning to future classes. The Academy had tried to make the hunt less lethal several times, but the Coalition High Command had always refused. They believed that future officers needed to have faced real death before they could command others in combat. They believed that any species that could not produce a single cadet willing to face the hunt was not worthy of officer rank. It was brutal. It was ancient. It was the trial that every instructor hated but none of us could change. Kira was dropped at the southern edge of the preserve, near a river she would have to cross on her first day. The rest of us watched her through the tracking cameras in the command center. Dean Korvac was there. Ellis was there. A dozen instructors and senior officers sat around the main display, following every cadet's progress on a vast screen covered in moving dots. Most cadets spent the first hour freezing in place, hiding, listening for predators. A reasonable strategy. Avoid the creatures until you have learned their patterns. Kira spent her first hour building a snare. She found a spot near the river. She gathered materials. She worked with quick, practiced movements, the movements of someone who had done this kind of work many times before. She built a small trap using vines and sharpened sticks, the kind of trap I later learned was common among Earth hunters who hunted small animals for food. She set the trap. She moved away. She waited. Within 20 minutes she had caught a small mammal. She prepared it. She made a small, carefully hidden fire. She cooked it. She ate it. She had been in the preserve for 2 hours, and she had already eaten a meal. Dean Korvac said, "Is she not afraid?" I said quietly, "I think she is having fun." By the end of the first day, she had crossed the river, built a sleeping shelter, identified safe plants to eat, and was tracking a large creature through the jungle. Not running from it, tracking it. She was following its footprints, examining broken branches, studying droppings. She was a predator now. A small, soft-looking predator who was following something much larger than herself and taking careful notes about its behavior. The creature was a Virax Stalker, a six-legged hunter with venomous fangs and eyes on all sides of its head. A creature that had, in past hunts, killed cadets who had not even known they were being stalked. Kira was stalking it. She stalked it for 6 hours. She followed it from upwind so it could not smell her. She stayed low. She moved only when it moved. She studied its hunting patterns, its resting patterns, its movement patterns. She was learning it. She was studying it the way a scientist studies an unknown animal. Near the end of the 6th hour, the Virak stalker began hunting another creature, a small deer-like animal native to a different world. Kira watched the stalker hunt. She studied how it moved. She studied how it struck. She took mental notes. And then, when the stalker was distracted by its meal, Kira moved on. She did not engage it. She did not try to fight it. She had simply learned what she needed to learn, and then she left. In the command center, one of the instructors, a senior Vorthan named Karth, said something I will remember for the rest of my life. Karth said, "She is not hunting the creatures. She is hunting information." By the second day, she had reached the middle region of the preserve. She had avoided 3 more predators, outthought a pack of shriekfangs by climbing into a tree they could not reach, and had somehow managed to find a small cave where she slept for 4 hours in complete safety. She was rested, she was fed, she was alert. The other cadets were not doing as well. 3 had already been extracted after encounters with predators. 2 had gotten lost and were heading in the wrong direction. 1 had panicked and was hiding in a thick bush, unable to move. Kira could have reached the beacon by the end of the 2nd day if she had moved quickly. She chose not to. Instead, she began moving toward a signal she had detected, a faint electronic pulse from one of the other cadets. She was going to help. Dean Korvac stood up. The dean said sharply, "She cannot do that. The hunt is a solo trial." I said, "Sir, the rules say she cannot accept help from other cadets. They do not say she cannot offer it." The dean sat back down. The dean looked at me. The dean said, "You are enjoying this." I was a little. I could not deny it. Kira reached the other cadet. It was the young Jelthari, Kui, the same one she had helped during the lifting test. Kui had been injured by a shriekfang. Kui was bleeding from a wound in Kui's leg. Kui had been trying to continue and had failed and had finally collapsed behind a fallen log, waiting for the end. Kira found Kui. She knelt beside Kui. She opened her first aid kit. She treated Kui's wound with the skill of someone who had done field medicine before. She talked to Kui the whole time, telling Kui jokes, asking about Kui's family, keeping Kui calm. She bandaged the leg. She gave Kui water. She gave Kui some of her own food. And then she helped Kui stand, and she put Kui's arm over her shoulder, and the 2 of them began moving toward the beacon together. She was carrying another cadet through a jungle full of apex predators. She was moving slowly now because Kui could not move quickly. She was exposing herself to risk she did not need to take. She was making her own trial harder to help someone who, by the rules, was supposed to fail. She did not seem to care about the rules. The predators came for them. Of course they did. A slow-moving pair in a jungle full of hunters, easy targets, the kind of prey that drew attention. The first was a pair of shriekfangs. Kira saw them first. She told Kui to stay calm and she pushed Kui gently behind her and she picked up a thick branch from the ground. The shriekfangs circled. They were faster than her. They were lighter than her. They had longer claws and sharper teeth. She did not try to fight them in a straight contest. She feinted. She made loud noises. She threw dirt in their eyes. She used every trick a human hunter had ever developed against faster prey. She was not trying to win. She was trying to convince the shriekfangs that she and Kui were not worth the effort. It worked. After 2 minutes of her strange, unpredictable behavior, the shriekfangs decided that this odd small creature was too confusing to be worth the risk, and they moved on. She kept going. She kept carrying Kui. She reached the center of the preserve late on the 3rd day. She pressed the beacon. A pickup shuttle arrived. Kui was put on the shuttle first. Kui was taken to medical. Kira did not board the shuttle. She waved it off. She had something else to do. Dean Korvac was on the radio. The dean said, "Cadet Voss, the trial is complete. The shuttle is there to extract you. What are you doing?" Kira said into her wrist communicator, "Sir, there is a young creature a few kilometers back. Its mother was killed by a dread maw yesterday. I want to bring it back with me." The dean stared at the screen. The dean said, very slowly, "Cadet Voss, are you asking permission to bring an apex predator back to the academy?" Kira said, "Sir, she is a baby. She is going to die out here without her mother. She is a Virac stalker cub. I have been watching her since yesterday. She is scared and she is alone. I would like to bring her home." There was a long silence in the command center. Ellis said in a very small voice, "Her emotional readings are off the charts. Commander, she is feeling genuine grief for this predator. A predator, I would remind everyone, of a species that has eaten 3 cadets in the last century." I said, "Let her bring it." The dean looked at me like I had grown a new set of limbs. I said, "Sir, I think the more we learn about her species, the more we need to understand what makes them different. A human who can walk into a jungle full of monsters and come out wanting to adopt one of them as a pet, that is something we need to record. That is something we need to learn from." The dean thought about it for a long time. Then the dean said, "Approved. But if that creature hurts anyone, the cadet is responsible." Kira went back. She found the cub. She approached it carefully. The cub was hungry and frightened. Kira sat down on the ground a few meters away and she did not move. She just sat there for nearly an hour. She did not approach the cub. She did not talk to it really. She just let it see her, let it smell her, let it understand that she was not a threat. Then she slowly held out a piece of dried meat from her ration pack. The cub approached her, slowly, carefully. The cub took the meat. The cub retreated a few meters. The cub ate the meat. The cub looked at her again. She held out another piece. By the time she left the preserve 3 hours later, the cub was following her at her heels. She named it Biscuit. It was a strange name. I asked her about it later. She said that Biscuit was the name of a pet her grandmother had owned when Kira was a child, a small soft animal that Kira had loved. She said the name made her feel at home. She walked out of the jungle carrying a small apex predator on her shoulder, and she was smiling, and she was humming, and she was asking whether dinner was ready. In the command center, one of the instructors, a senior Mendori, said, "We are going to need a new trial." I did not laugh, but I almost did. The next morning, Kira was in the training yard with Biscuit. Kui, now bandaged and on crutches, was sitting on a bench nearby. The other cadets were watching from a respectful distance. Kira was teaching Biscuit to respond to hand signals. Biscuit was learning fast. I watched through my office window and I realized something. The trials had been designed to test cadets, to see what they were made of, to filter out the weak and to reveal the strong. We had never considered that a cadet might use the trials as a test of us, as a test of the galaxy, as a test of whether we were worthy of someone like her. I sat down at my desk. I began writing a report to the Coalition High Command. The report was short. It contained only one recommendation. I recommended that the Coalition immediately increase the diplomatic rank of the Earth delegation. I recommended that human officers be given priority placement in command positions. I recommended that every member species of the Coalition be required to study human history and human culture as part of their military education. I did not explain in full why I was making these recommendations. I simply said that I had watched a young human, alone and unarmed, walk through a jungle full of monsters and bring out a small frightened animal in her arms. I wrote that if humanity ever decided to stop being friends with the Coalition, we would all be in more danger than we had ever understood. I sent the report. I closed my computer. I sat in my office in silence for a long time. The fourth trial was next, the tactical command simulation, the AI adversary that had never lost. I had no idea what she was going to do to it. But I had stopped being surprised. I had started instead to be hopeful. The tactical command simulation was the trial that separated soldiers from officers. Every cadet who had made it this far had proven they could survive. The fourth trial asked a different question. It asked whether they could lead. The system was simple in design. The cadet was placed in a command chair in a simulated starship. They were given a squad of 12 simulated officers, each with distinct skills and personalities. They were given a mission, and then they were pitted against Arbiter, the Academy's training artificial intelligence, a system that had been improved and updated for over 100 years. Arbiter had a perfect record, 847 exam cycles, not a single loss. It did not play fair because war does not play fair. It learned from every cadet it faced. It adapted in real time. It had access to every tactical manual in the Coalition database, and it could simulate 1,000,000 battle scenarios in the time it took a cadet to take a breath. Cadets were not graded on whether they defeated Arbiter. That was considered impossible. They were graded on 3 things: how long their squad survived, how many of the 12 squad mates they kept alive, and how well they held to their original mission objectives. The previous record had been set 112 years ago. A Tharsan cadet named Meshel. Meshel had survived for 47 minutes and had preserved 3 out of 12 squad mates before being wiped out. Meshel had gone on to become one of the Coalition's greatest fleet commanders. The performance had been considered so remarkable that instructors still referenced it in their classes today. The day of Kira's simulation, the entire academy gathered in the main observation hall. Instructors, support staff, even other cadets were allowed to watch this one because it was the most public of the trials. The simulation took place over hours, and the observation was educational. Cadets watched the way a person might watch a master play a complex strategy game, hopping to learn from both the player and the opponent. Before the simulation, Kira was given the standard hour of briefing. She met her simulated squad, 12 computer-generated officers with personalities modeled after real Coalition soldiers. She was told her mission. Her flagship was the lead vessel in a convoy of civilian transport ships, 3 million civilians. The convoy was under attack by an unknown enemy force. Her job was to protect the civilians and reach the safe zone. Arbiter was the unknown enemy. Arbiter always was. Kira studied the mission briefing. She asked careful questions. She took notes. She seemed focused but not nervous. Her hands were steady. And then she did something no cadet had ever done. She asked to meet her simulated squad before the battle. The briefing officer said that was not part of the trial protocol. The cadet entered command already knowing the squad's stats. That was standard. Kira said politely that she wanted to talk to them, not to read about them, to talk to them. The briefing officer, confused, checked with Dean Korvac. Dean Korvac, sitting in the observation hall, thought for a long moment. Then Dean Korvac said, "Let her." Kira was given 1 hour in the simulated briefing room with her 12 artificial squad mates. I watched on a side monitor while the main audience waited. She did not ask them about their skills. She asked them about their families. She asked them where they were from. She asked them about their favorite foods. She asked them what they hoped to do after the war. She told them about herself, about Earth, about her little brother, about her grandfather who had taught her to fish. She made jokes. She laughed. She made them laugh too, and I do not know how because they were software. They were not designed to feel emotion. But something about the way she spoke to them, the way she treated them as real beings, made them respond in ways the simulation had not been programmed to allow. By the end of the hour, they were not her squad mates. They were her crew. They were people she knew, people she cared about. I had never seen anyone approach the fourth trial this way. The simulation began. Arbiter opened with a standard ambush. 3 enemy cruisers emerging from behind an asteroid field, firing on the lead transports. A classic scenario, designed to force the cadet to immediately triage between defending the transports and attacking the threat. Most cadets in this moment made the correct tactical choice. They sacrificed the weakest transport to buy time for the others. It was cold, but it was efficient. It was what the coalition manuals recommended. Kira did not sacrifice a transport. She pulled her flagship between the attackers and the transports. She used her own ship as a shield. She returned fire. She took damage, but she did not lose a single transport. Arbiter adjusted. Arbiter sent a second wave. 4 more cruisers, this time flanking from 2 directions. Now Kira had to deal with enemies on 2 sides, with damage already on her flagship, with a long convoy of civilian ships she had refused to abandon. This was the moment when most cadets collapsed. The situation was, by all tactical measures, impossible to survive without heavy casualties. Kira did something strange. She called her squadmates by their names, not their ranks. Their names. She said, "Mira, take the starboard fighters and break their right flank. Just scatter them. Do not engage. Make them turn to chase you. Derek, I need you on long-range sensors. Find me a place where these civilians can hide. Kale, get me a damage report on the weakest transport. I want to know how long she has." Her crew responded. They responded with something that was not in Arbiter's prediction models. They responded like they believed in her, because she had spent an hour making them believe in her. And Arbiter, for the first time in 100 years, began to miscalculate. The enemy ships pursued the scattering fighters. Kira found a dust cloud from an old nebula and hid the convoy inside it. She bought time. She bought an entire hour of time. During that hour, she repaired her flagship. She treated her wounded. She had conversations with her crew that kept them steady, and she planned. When the next attack came, she was ready. Arbiter had learned from the first engagement. It sent a massive fleet. 12 cruisers, 3 battleships, dozens of smaller attack craft. A crushing force designed to finish the trial decisively. Kira looked at the tactical display. She studied it for a long moment, and then she smiled. She began to bluff. I want to emphasize that word. She bluffed. Against an artificial intelligence that had perfect records of every tactical pattern in the galaxy, against a system that could calculate 1,000,000 scenarios per second, against a machine that had never, in its entire operational life, been fooled. She bluffed. She sent false signals from her flagship. She transmitted radio traffic pretending to be a much larger force. She moved her ships in patterns that suggested reinforcements were hiding in nearby dust clouds. She gave orders that sounded like she was coordinating with unseen allies. She made Arbiter believe that the convoy was not alone. Arbiter, for all its power, had never learned to distinguish between a true threat and a confident lie. Because in 847 cycles, no cadet had ever dared to try. Arbiter hesitated. It sent a probe to check the dust clouds. The probe found nothing. Arbiter recalculated. Arbiter sent 3 more probes. They also found nothing. Arbiter was faced with a choice. Commit its fleet against what might be a trap or pull back and regroup. A human would have pushed through. A human would have called her bluff. Arbiter was not human. Arbiter was a machine designed to optimize outcomes. Arbiter pulled back to regroup. Kira used that time to move her convoy to safety. The observation hall was completely silent. I looked at Dean Korvac. The Dean's mouth was open. The Dean's silver fingers were gripping the arms of his chair. I could see the Dean's pulse in the thin veins of his neck. Ellis leaned toward me and whispered, "It believed her. The machine believed her lie." Around us, the instructors from other species were whispering in their native languages. I heard one Vorthan instructor say, in a hushed voice, "This is not a trial anymore. This is history." The battle continued for 5 more hours. Kira did things I cannot fully describe. She predicted Arbiter's adjustments before Arbiter made them. She sacrificed tactical advantages to maintain her crew's confidence. She risked everything to save a single damaged fighter, because the pilot was a young officer named Tomas whose simulated child was waiting for him on the nearest station. She refused to treat her squad as numbers. She refused to treat the civilians as acceptable losses. She refused every single assumption that Arbiter had been built to exploit. And Arbiter slowly began to fail. At the 4th hour, Arbiter requested a pause. This had never happened before. The system requested 30 seconds to recalibrate its strategic parameters. Dean Korvac looked at me. The dean said, "Is that even allowed?" I did not know. I checked the manual. The manual did not say. The manual had not considered that Arbiter might ever need to pause. The dean approved the pause. When the simulation resumed, Arbiter had shifted to its highest combat mode. It stopped playing by standard tactics. It began doing things that had never been recorded in training exercises. It deployed unexpected formations. It used backup weapons systems. It fought dirty. Kira fought dirtier. She used the civilian ships themselves as tactical tools, not as shields but as decoys. She coordinated small maneuvers that the coalition manuals would have never approved. She used a tactic from Earth history called a naval feint, something that had not been used in serious warfare in over 200 years. She used another tactic she later told me was called a Hail Mary, which apparently referred to a sports maneuver from a game called American football. At the 5-hour mark, the unthinkable happened. Arbiter's flagship was disabled. Kira had calculated correctly that even an artificial intelligence had to centralize its coordination. She had tracked the pattern of Arbiter's orders. She had identified the command ship, and she had thrown everything she had at that single target in a coordinated strike that should have failed but did not. The command ship went dark. Arbiter's fleet scattered, cut off from central coordination. The battle was over. Kira had not only survived the trial, she had won. All 12 of her squad mates were alive. All 3 million civilians on the transports were alive. Her flagship was damaged but operational. The enemy fleet was destroyed or in retreat. The simulation ended. The observation hall was silent. Then someone, a young cadet in the back of the room, began to clap. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. Every species present was making its own equivalent of applause. The Mendori tapped their long fingers together. The Vorthans stomped their massive feet. The Osni made a high humming sound that their species used for approval. The sound filled the observation hall like a wave. Kira walked out of the simulation chamber. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, but she was smiling. She saw the standing ovation. She looked confused for a moment. Then she waved at the audience, said thank you, and asked if there was any water nearby. Dean Korvac walked down to meet her. The dean, who had run this academy for 60 years, who had seen every trial 1,000 times, was crying. The dean shook her hand. The dean tried to speak and could not. The dean simply bowed to her, a gesture of respect that the dean's species reserved for the highest officers. Kira bowed back gently, even though she did not know the custom. Ellis ran to her and hugged her. Ellis said that Ellis had been monitoring her emotional state throughout the battle, and that Ellis had never felt such a clear combination of fear, love, determination, and hope in one mind at the same time. Kira said, "I was scared. I was scared the whole time. My crew was my crew. I could not lose them." I walked down to her. I did not bow. I put one of my 6 hands on her shoulder, which was my species' highest sign of respect. I said, "Cadet Voss, what you did today has never been done. The Coalition will remember this trial forever." She looked up at me with her green eyes. She said, "Sir, can I ask a question?" I said, "Of course." She said, "Would it be okay if I tried it again tomorrow? I think I could do it faster. I think if I had started the bluff earlier, I could have finished the whole thing in 3 hours." I stared at her. She was not joking. She was genuinely asking. She had just done the impossible, and her first thought was that she could have done it better. I said, "Kira, tomorrow you are taking the day off. Tomorrow you are resting. Tomorrow you are doing nothing except eating and sleeping and maybe playing with Biscuit." She thought about that. She said, "Okay, but the day after?" I said, "We will talk about it." That night, I wrote another report to the Coalition High Command. I wrote about the trial. I wrote about the bluff. I wrote about the squadmates who had loved her after 1 hour of conversation. I wrote about the artificial intelligence that had requested a pause for the first time in its operational life. I wrote about the standing ovation. And at the end of the report, I wrote something that I have never written before or since. I wrote, "I recommend that the 4th trial be retired, not because it is too difficult, because it is no longer sufficient to measure the capabilities of cadets like Kira Voss. We need new trials. We need harder trials. We need trials designed for species that treat our hardest challenges as warm-ups." I sent the report. I closed my office. I walked home under the purple sky of our training moon. I passed by the training yard on my way home. It was late. Most of the cadets were asleep, but there was a single light on in the corner of the yard. Kira was there, sitting on a bench. Biscuit was in her lap. She was talking to a simulated squad member, one of the ones from the trial, Mira. The simulation was set up as a visit mode, so that cadets could speak with their simulated companions after a trial if they wished. Most cadets never bothered. Kira had gone to thank her crew. I watched from the shadows. I could not hear what she said, but I could see the movements of her hands, the way she smiled when Mira responded, the way she held Biscuit close while she talked to a computer program as if it were an old friend. I went home and did not sleep. Because I knew now what the Coalition had gained when humanity had joined us. I knew what walked among us. I knew what young men and women Earth was raising out there on that distant blue world, and I knew at last that the galaxy was safer with them as our friends. And I knew with a quiet certainty that the final trial, the one we did not speak of, the trial of the impossible choice, was going to go very differently than any of us expected. Because Kira Voss did not accept impossible choices. She rewrote them. The 5th trial was the one we did not tell cadets about. It had no name in the Academy handbook. It was not listed on any schedule. Cadets only learned of its existence when they arrived on the day of the 5th trial, and the doors opened and they were led inside. We called it the Choice. It was older than the Academy itself. It had been designed by the founders of the Coalition, the wise old beings who had survived the First Great War and who had understood something terrible about command. They had understood that a true officer, a true leader, sometimes had to make choices that destroyed a piece of them. A choice where both options were bad, where saving some required losing others, where the mission required a sacrifice that could never be taken back. The trial was simple in design. A cadet was placed in a final command scenario. Their squad was mortally wounded. The objective, saving millions of civilians, was within reach. The only way to complete the mission in time was to leave the dying squad behind and keep moving. Only 4% of cadets had ever completed this trial. The 96% who failed did not fail because they could not find the objective. They failed because they refused to leave their squad. They sat down with their dying friends. They held their hands. They let the mission timer run out. They let the civilians die because they could not abandon the ones in front of them. The Coalition considered these cadets to have failed. The Coalition believed that a true officer had to learn to make the hard call, to choose the greater good, to accept that some beings had to die so that more could live. I had always felt uneasy about this trial. I had never said anything. It was tradition. It was how we had always done it. I was a small voice in a large system, and the wisdom of the ancients was supposed to be unquestioned. The morning of Kira's choice trial, I woke up early. I could not sleep. I walked to the academy before dawn. I sat in my office. I reviewed her file for the 10th time, every trial, every record, every moment of her time at the academy. I was not worried about whether she would pass or fail. I was worried about what she would teach us. Kira arrived at the trial chamber at her scheduled time. She was calm. Biscuit was with her, sitting on her shoulder, now a regular sight around the academy. Biscuit had grown over the months. Biscuit was a small but respectable apex predator, and Biscuit had taken to Kira the way children took to their parents. The academy had stopped trying to separate them. Kira asked if Biscuit could come into the chamber with her. I told her no. The trial was hers alone. She kissed Biscuit on the head and handed the small creature to Ellis, who had agreed to watch Biscuit during the trial. Biscuit whined. Kira told Biscuit she would be back soon. Kira walked into the chamber, the door sealed. The chamber built the scenario around her. It used her memories and her tactical experiences to construct a world she would accept as real. She was placed in the role of a commander on a strategic mission. Her small squad was with her. The squad had been designed, deliberately, to include faces she would love. The simulation had pulled from her memories to populate it. Her squad included versions of Mira and Derek and the others from the 4th trial. It included simulated versions of her new friends from the academy, Qui and Keth, and the Drenmer Vor. The simulation wanted her to feel the full weight of who she would have to leave behind. The mission was clear. There was a bunker 400 meters away containing a communications array. If she could reach the array and activate it, she could send an evacuation signal to the 3 million civilians trapped in the nearby city. The city would be destroyed in 12 minutes. Without the signal, everyone would die. Her squad had been caught in an ambush. They were wounded, some mortally. The fake blood and fake injuries were so realistic that 3 previous cadets had refused to believe the simulation was not real. They were lying on the ground around her, moaning, calling her name. The timer started, 12 minutes. Kira looked around. She assessed the situation. She did not run toward the bunker. She did not run anywhere. She stopped. She stood very still in the middle of the simulated battlefield, surrounded by her dying simulated friends, with a 12-minute timer ticking down in the corner of her vision. And then she did what no cadet had ever done. She sat down. She did not sit to give up. She did not sit because she was broken. She sat because she was thinking. I had watched her think before. She had a specific way of doing it. She put her hands on her knees. She lowered her head. She went very quiet. She let her mind work. In the observation room, I watched the monitors. I watched her heart rate. It was steady. I watched her brain activity, something Ellis could monitor at a distance. It was intense but calm. She was thinking through every variable. At 40 seconds into the trial, she stood up. She did not run to the bunker. She began moving debris. She was building something, a stretcher. I saw it before any of the other instructors did because I had read the reports about Earth's military history. Humans had a tradition. They called it battlefield recovery. When humans went to war, their one universal rule was that no soldier was left behind. Not dead, not dying, not wounded. They brought every single body home. It was not just a practical rule. It was a sacred rule. It was part of how they defined themselves as a people. Kira was not going to choose. She was going to refuse the choice. She built the stretcher from broken debris and pieces of her own gear. She tore her own uniform to make fastenings. She worked quickly, efficiently. She was a young woman who had read her species' history and had practiced its oldest traditions. She was the product of 2 million years of human beings refusing to leave each other to die. She began loading her squad onto the stretcher. She could only carry 2 at a time. The timer was at 10 minutes now. The simulation made sure she knew that every second she spent on her squad was a second she was not spending on the civilians. She loaded the 2 most critically wounded. She began running. She dragged the stretcher behind her. She covered 100 meters. She dropped them off at a safer location. She ran back. The timer was at 8 minutes. She loaded 2 more. She ran again. The timer was at 6 minutes. She was sweating now. I could see it on the monitor. Her heart rate was rising. Her face was red. She was using her species' sweat response to keep herself cool, but she was also pushing harder than I had ever seen her push. She made 3 more trips. She moved all 12 of her squad to safety. Some were simulated dead. She carried the dead ones anyway, because humans do not leave their dead behind, because that was the rule, because that was who she was. The timer was at 2 minutes. 400 meters to the bunker, in 2 minutes. She ran. She ran faster than she had ever run. She ran with the kind of speed that her species had been selected for over 2 million years. She ran the way her ancestors had run after wounded prey, the way they had run from predators, the way they had run to the aid of their tribes. She ran with everything she had. She reached the bunker with 8 seconds on the clock. She activated the array. She sent the signal. The simulation showed the civilians receiving the evacuation order. The ships lifted off. The city was destroyed moments later, but everyone inside it had been evacuated. 3 million civilians saved. 12 squad members recovered. No one left behind. The simulation completed. Kira sat down in the middle of the simulated bunker. She was breathing hard. She was sweating. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the extreme exertion of what she had just done. Her green eyes were wet. She had refused the premise. She had refused to accept that there were only 2 choices. She had found a third option by sheer will, by refusing to give up on either the mission or her people. She had changed the rules of the trial itself. The trial administrator, a senior Osni named Thurun, walked into the observation room. Thurun was angry. Thurun said that the scenario parameters had not been met. Thurun said that the scenario required the cadet to make the hard choice, to leave the squad behind, that this was the entire point of the trial. Thurun said that Kira had cheated by refusing to play the scenario as it was designed. Thurun demanded that the trial be marked as a failure. Dean Korvac stood up. The dean walked over to Thurun. The dean was very calm. The dean said, "Thurun, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. When our ancestors designed this trial 800 years ago, what were they trying to measure?" Thurun said, "They were trying to measure whether the cadet could make the hard call." The dean said, "No. They were trying to measure whether the cadet had the depth of character to face the hardest situation a commander could face. They were trying to find cadets who would not break. Thurun, look at the screen. Tell me what you see." On the screen, Kira was now checking on her simulated squad, talking to them, making sure they were safe. The simulation had ended, but her concern for them was continuing. Thurun looked. Thurun did not speak for a long time. The dean said gently, "She did not break. She did not break, and she did not choose, and she did not fail. She found a way. She did something we have never considered possible. Thurun, in 800 years, has any cadet ever refused the choice and saved everyone?" Thurun said no. The dean said, "Then perhaps we have been measuring the wrong thing." The dean turned to me. The dean said, "Thavis, assign her a new grade, a perfect score. I am creating a new category for this trial retroactively. From today forward, cadets who find a third path will be graded in this new category. It will be called the VAS standard." I did not argue. I did not want to. The door to the chamber opened. Kira walked out. She was tired. Her uniform was torn. But she was standing up straight, and she was already asking if her squadmates were all right, even though they had been simulations. I met her at the door. I did not know what to say. I had known her for 2 years now. I had watched her walk through every trial the coalition had designed. I had watched her do the impossible over and over. I had watched her change the meaning of the word cadet. I said finally, "Kira, Why did you not make the choice? She looked at me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Sir, the point was not to choose. The point was to find a way. Nobody gets left behind. That is not how we do it. That is not who we are. If there is a way to save everyone, even if it is hard, even if it is impossible, we find it. We always find it. That is the job. I looked at her. This small young woman from a death world. This daughter of a species that had survived apex predators and built civilizations and reached the stars. This human who had walked into our hardest trials and made them look easy by simply being who she was. I said, Kira Voss, you have completed the final trial. You are the top graduate of your class. You are, in fact, the top graduate in the history of this academy. Welcome to the Coalition Officer Corps. She smiled. She said, Thank you, sir. And then she said, Can I go see Biscuit? I think she has been worried about me. I laughed. I actually laughed. I took her to the hall where Ellis was waiting with Biscuit, and Biscuit ran to her and climbed up to her shoulder, and Kira hugged Biscuit and kissed Biscuit on the head and said sorry for being gone so long. The graduation ceremony was held 3 days later. The Coalition High Command attended in person. Representatives from every member species were there. The hall was full of dignitaries, officers, and news correspondents from a dozen worlds. Kira walked across the stage. She was given her officer's pin. She shook the hand of the Supreme Commander of the Coalition Fleet. She received a small wooden box containing a commemorative medallion, the traditional gift to a top graduate. She did not give a speech. She had asked not to. She had said privately that she did not want to be the center of attention. She had said that everyone in her class had worked hard and that she did not want to take away from their moment. She accepted her pin with a smile and she waved to her family who had traveled from Earth to see her graduate. Her little brother was there. Her parents were there. Her grandmother was there, the one whose old pet had given Biscuit the name. They were crying. They were proud. After the ceremony, 3 separate fleets tried to recruit her. They offered her command positions that officers 10 times her age would have fought for. They offered her starships and crews and assignments on the most prestigious missions in the Coalition. She turned them all down. She said she needed to go home first. She said she had not seen Earth in 2 years. She said she wanted to visit her grandmother's farm. She said she wanted to help her little brother with his homework. She said she wanted to sleep in her own bed for a while and eat her mother's cooking. The Coalition High Command was stunned. Top graduates did not refuse assignments. Top graduates took the best postings and began their careers immediately. Kira did not care. She said her family came first. She said the Coalition could wait. The Coalition waited. She went home. She took Biscuit with her. She said Biscuit deserved to see Earth, even if Biscuit was an apex predator from a different world. She said Biscuit would like Earth. She said everyone liked Earth once they saw it. I watched her transport lift off from the Academy landing pad. I stood where I had stood 2 years earlier when she had arrived and asked me where the cafeteria was. I thought about that small moment. I thought about how much I had not understood at the time. I thought about her homeworld. I looked up Earth's classification one more time. Class 9 Deathworld, extreme hostility, apex predators, lethal weather, a moon that pulled the oceans. Millions of humans living there not as survivors but as people going about their daily lives, raising families, going to school, growing gardens, watching sunsets. A world that had made Kira Voss. A world where Kira Voss was considered normal. I closed her file. I walked back to my office. I sat down at my desk. I wrote my final report on the academic year. I wrote only one line. I wrote, the exams were not too hard. We were simply unprepared for what a human considers easy. I submitted the report. I turned off my computer. Outside my window, the training yard was full of new cadets. The next class had arrived. A new group of young beings from a dozen different worlds, ready to face the trials that had been rewritten in the wake of Kira Voss. The academy had changed after her. We reformed the trials, not to make them harder. We made them more humane. We added team options where cadets could support each other. We added the Voss standard, a grading category for cadets who found third paths. We changed the choice trial entirely so that cadets who refused the premise and found creative solutions were no longer marked as failures. We did not do this because Kira had asked us to. She never asked. She would never have asked. It was not her way. We did it because she had shown us something we had forgotten in 847 cycles of trying to break our cadets. The point had never been to see who could survive. The point had been to see who would refuse to let anyone else die. We had needed a girl from a Deathworld to teach us that. I am old now. I will retire from the academy soon. My service to the coalition is nearly complete. I have lived a long life and I have seen many things and I have trained many officers. But I will never forget the small young woman with green eyes who walked into our hardest trials and made them look easy, who never bragged, who never boasted, who never left anyone behind, who carried a baby apex predator out of a jungle and named it Biscuit, who talked to artificial intelligences like they were old friends, who refused every impossible choice we gave her and found better answers than we had imagined. I will never forget her. And when I sit alone in my office sometimes, late at night, thinking about the galaxy and its future, I am comforted by a single thought. There are millions of Kira Vosses on Earth. Millions. All of them raised in the same way. All of them shaped by the same harsh, beautiful world. All of them carrying the same simple rule in their hearts. Nobody gets left behind. That is not how we do it. That is not who we are. The galaxy is safer with them as our friends. And I thank every star in the sky that they chose to be our friends. Because if they had not, the galaxy would be a very different place, and I would be telling a very different story. But they did, and here we are, and the future is bright. That is my story. That is what I saw. That is what Kira Voss taught me and taught our academy and taught the coalition itself. The exams were not too hard. We were simply unprepared for what a human considers easy. The end.